Well, good evening. My name is Minnie Benjamin, and I thank you for visiting my burial site. At the age of 53, I was sent to an early grave as the result of a heinous crime perpetrated by my own husband. I was born many miles from here in Otto, New York, on August 26, 1867, the daughter of Reverend John and Mary McAlpine. I received a fine education, and I went on to earn a college degree. After graduating from college, I began my teaching career in Illinois. It was there that I met the man who would become my husband, Leonard Todd Benjamin. Leonard was a music professor and a pianist, as well as a master of the pipe organ. We were married at Batavia, Illinois on November 7, 1891. We lived in Illinois for a time. Our first child and only daughter, Mary Bell, was born there in 1892. We later moved to Manson, Iowa, when Leonard was hired as the organist for the Congregational Church. That is where our two sons were born, Paul in 1898 and Ralph in 1902. We came here to Algona in 1904 when Leonard accepted the position of musical director and organist for the local Congregational Church. As part of his organist duties, Leonard played for all weddings, funerals, and for any other church function. He also provided piano and organ lessons for a large number of students, which helped to supplement our income. His musical talents were shared throughout the community, including such things as member of the Algona Harp Orchestra and the Algona Band. Now, my duties as a wife and a mother kept me quite busy, but I always found time for volunteer activities, including much time spent at the church. My fondest activity by far was working for the Red Cross. Over the years, I served as chairman of the workroom, secretary in charge of the workroom, and after a special course of training, I was in charge of the entire Home Service Department of Kossuth County. This allowed me to render aid to servicemen returning from World War I and their families. Being able to provide comfort and assistance to them, it brought such joy to my heart. While my Red Cross activities brought me great joy, my marriage did not. Sometime after coming to Algona, my brother and his wife came to stay with us for several months. Now, Leonard liked to drink a little bit too much, as did my sister-in-law. I began to notice the two of them spending time together alone. And then I discovered personal notes which he had written to her. When I confronted him about this, he blamed it on his drinking, swore that it was nothing serious. Well, my brother and his wife returned to Nebraska, and we decided to put the unhappy event behind us. Leonard seemed genuinely repentant for the indiscretion and pleaded for my forgiveness, which I eventually gave to him. Our children were not yet grown, and I desired to keep my family together. Excuse me. A few years passed. Our daughter married and our oldest son went off to college, leaving just Ralph at home. Leonard continued his work at the church, along with the private music lessons. At some point, I became aware of gossip that was circulating, that Leonard and one of his students were having an affair. I confronted him once again, and he denied it all. Unfortunately, the rumors proved to be true when Leonard and his student were caught in a compromising situation. The young woman's parents were so concerned that they arranged a meeting with us, and they questioned Leonard about all the promises he had made to her of marriage once he was divorced. It was an extremely humiliating experience for me. She claimed that he had told her on numerous occasions that a divorce was either pending or had been granted. But for various reasons, we continued to live together. Leonard, of course, denied everything. He said that he had told her he was not looking for a divorce, and even if he got one, he would not marry her under any circumstances. Well, after hearing all of this, I consulted an attorney myself. Leonard repeatedly begged for my forgiveness, and he told me he had ended the affair. So I finally resolved not to pursue the dissolution of our marriage. The scandal was too much for the church, however, and they asked for Leonard's resignation, which he reluctantly gave. He had lost most of his students as a result, leaving us virtually penniless. He was able to secure a position in Chicago for a fresh start, so we packed up all our worldly goods and planned to leave on January 17th so that Leonard could take a 2-week course of instruction and so we could find a place to live. We then intended to come back to Algona for our possessions. Creditors were pressing for payment, so we sold all that we could, and Leonard attempted to collect on past due accounts that were owed to him. These financial troubles only added to the stress in our relationship. On January 15th, 1921, I attended a bridge party and stopped by a few groceries on the way home. Leonard had walked downtown to purchase some oil for the stove. We then walked home together, arriving about 5 p.m. Leonard started a fire and he went for a pail of coal while I retrieved our mail. Among the bills, I found a letter addressed with feminine handwriting. I tore it open, and as I read, it became quite obvious the affair had never ceased. I immediately threw it in the fire. I was shaking and stunned, and I collapsed into my chair. When Leonard came back into the house, he could see that I was visibly upset. I told him about the letter and that I knew the affair was not over. Oh, I was so angry. I began to upbraid him severely, recounting his past promises, lies, deceit, and the humiliation he had inflicted upon me and our children. Leonard became agitated. He started pacing beside my chair. On the floor, we had some wooden crates that we had been packing and nailing shut. Without warning, Leonard grabbed the nearby hammer and viciously hit the back of my head, killing me instantly. Working himself into a frenzy, he struck another blow to my skull and one to each of my temples. By this time, my body had fallen to the floor. He kicked me numerous times, causing deep bruises and other injuries. Coming to his senses and realizing what he had done, he attempted to cover his crime. He arranged my body and tore at my clothing, including my undergarments, to make it appear as though I had been attacked and ravished. He then calmly put on his overcoat and walked downtown to establish an alibi. He visited several business houses, he purchased a few groceries, and then he called at the Candy Kitchen, where Alice Moline worked. Alice was engaged to our son Paul, and she had been rooming with us. Well, she was not quite ready when Leonard first called, so he wandered the city for a few more minutes, and then they left together for the short walk home. As they approached, Alice noticed that the house was dark, and she mentioned it to Leonard. When they opened the door and turned on the lights, they saw my body lying in a pool of blood. Leonard rushed to my side to check for a pulse and a heartbeat. Detecting neither, he remarked, "I think Mrs. Benjamin is dead." They then ran to a neighbor's house for help. After examining the scene, Dr. Hartman declared that I had been dead for perhaps 30 minutes. When coroner Warren Laird came for my body, he noticed a number of blood stains on Leonard's vest, coat, and pants. Leonard claimed that his clothing must have come into contact with the blood when he and Alice discovered my body. But since he had been wearing his overcoat at the time of the discovery, the authorities eventually held that the evidence was conclusive. A coroner's jury was called without delay, and they quickly returned a verdict, charging Leonard with murder. He entered a not guilty plea and maintained his innocence for several days, bearing up under persistent questioning by authorities. At the request of the family, a state agent was hired to assist in the examination. Leonard remained calm and composed during the constant grilling. Now, this was before Miranda warnings, so his attorney did not need to be present during questioning. Finally, just before his arraignment, Leonard met privately with our children. It was then that he decided to confess. At sentencing a few days later, Leonard made his confession in open court to a packed house. Even the balcony, which had been closed for several years, was standing room only. He told of his infidelities, his dishonesty, and deception. The prosecuting attorney insisted on a first-degree murder conviction, while the defense argued heat of passion, and they pleaded for a second-degree murder conviction. After announcing that he was against capital punishment and would resign from the bench before pronouncing the death penalty, Judge Coyle found Leonard guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced him to 50 years hard labor at Fort Madison Penitentiary. That evening, Leonard boarded the train, handcuffed to Sheriff Hackman, for the journey to Fort Madison to begin serving his sentence. His incarceration would not be a long one. He died at the prison following a hernia operation in April of 1923, having served just 2 years and 2.5 months of his sentence. Leonard is buried at Oakland Cemetery in Fort Madison. The question will always remain as to his motive. Did he want me out of the picture so he was free to pursue his infatuation? Did he need my life insurance money to begin his new life? Or did he simply snap? The truth will never be known. But you have learned tonight that I paid for his lies and deceptions with my life.
Hello friends and neighbors. As it says on my tombstone, I am Arlen Benscooter. I'll start off by saying that speaking in front of groups, especially talking about myself, is not something I normally do. As my cousin Dean says, I would not want to do this at all. But Jane Nettleton can be pretty persuasive, so here I am. At least she said I could use notes, so I've got a script. You may recall that Dean was here a few years ago talking about Oliver van Bunschoten, or Benscooter, our Dutch joint ancestor, who staked a claim a little northeast of Algona in the mid-1850s. 1850s. I wouldn't say much about him except that he was very tall and strong, an accomplished blacksmith by trade and later business entrepreneur and the sheriff of Kossuth County. He's not buried here, but his first wife Martha is. That's the first stone up there that says mother, I believe, of that line of stones by the big Benscooter stone. She died only a year after her arrival in Kossuth County. Dean and I are descendants from that marriage. From then on, I come from a line of people who have farming in their bones. Our great-grandfather was Charles Grant Benscooter, their sixth and last born in 1849. He was always called Grant. By that time, the family had dropped the van. Too complicated, I guess. I don't know why, but we just got rid of the van. We're now Benscooters. I was not quite 9 when my mother died. Grant went to school in a small building erected inside the fort in Algona and also used as a meeting house and general assembly room for the community. The fort is now the location of the modern building housing Pseudo-Taxana County. By the time he was 17, his father had remarried and moved to Martin County. We're talking about my great-great-grandfather. There he had 10 more children with his wife Sarah. Grant chose to stay in Kossuth County where he was completely on his own with only the clothes on his back, good looks, plenty of muscle, and a strong determination to make his way in the world. He was always worked on farms, the only work he really enjoyed, and he bought his first 80 acres of land when he was 20. By that time, he couldn't afford to build on it. On April 13, 1872, he married Frances Ferguson, the daughter of another early Algona family. After the marriage, he rented land and continued to work very hard for 2 more years until he and Frances could move onto the property where my cousin Dean and Cleo live now. In time, his hard work earned him 400 acres free and clear. Later, he gave his only son George 160 acres of that land. Our great-grandfather, Grant, died on March 15th, 1910 in Algona, but Frances outlives him by 28 years. After a long illness, she died of cancer June 17, 1938, at the home of Dean's father, Arthur Benscooter. Dean and Cleo live on that farm now. Grant and Frances are buried right over here. My grandfather George, married right here, was born and raised in Plum Creek Township on a farm his father gave him. My grandmother was Laura Gilbert. She was born June 17, 1871 in Sparta, Wisconsin, the daughter of Hollis J. and Lucy Ensign Gilbert. The Gilberts eventually homesteaded in Plum Creek Township, and my great uncle Ernest owned the Plum Creek Elevator. You could see evidence of it near the Scuffham farm by the railroad tracks where John and Helen live now. George and Laura married June 21st, 1899, and had 4 boys. Gilbert Lewis, born May 30th, 1900. Arthur Leroy, Dean's father, born May 2nd, 1901. My father, George Clifton, usually called Cliff, was born December 25th, 1902. And Hollis Grant, born November 17th, 1907. Soon after Cliff was born, the family moves to Yakima, Washington, hearing that they might have a much better life than they've got right now in Kossuth County. They didn't stay long though. They soon came back to Iowa and the farms they all loved. Arthur and Gilbert graduated from high school, but my dad stayed home to farm. Arthur did become a farmer too. Gilbert became a co-op elevator manager and later owned his own elevator. Hollis also graduated from high school and settled on the Gilbert homestead, but where Beanie and Joanne Bodie now live, so the boys are all connected to farming. Eventually my grandparents retired, moved to Algona, and lived a long and full life. George passed away in 1956 and Laura in 1963. My father not only worked on his dad's farm, but he also was a hired man for other farmers. Because of his grandma Laura had the connection along the Plum Creek Road, including the Scuffhams, an English family, when Violet Scuffham became a country school teacher, he was working on a nearby farm. Violet was a member of the first girls club, not yet 4-H. On June 17, 1923, was elected secretary, so Cliff recognized her as a quality person. The two quietly courted, because no female teacher could be engaged or married while employed. No, sir. Their wedding was equally quiet at 9 a.m. on June 1st, 1927, at St. Thomas Episcopal Church in Algona. I arrived on the scene July 5th, 1937. Not quite a 4th of July baby. I was Cliff and Violet's only child, and the 5th generation of Ben Scooters in Plum Creek, that township. My earliest memories are following my dad around and wanting to be just like him. I did attend a country school through 8th grade and then graduated from Algona High School, where I was active in FFA in 1955 when I graduated. So from then on, Farmers Evening School was my way to continue my education. My mother was a 4-H leader, even in the 1970s, and a collection of her pins and other memorabilia are now on display at the Agton Sports Museum and the fairgrounds. Of course, I was in 4-H too. She was great help with my record books. Do you remember that? How many of you were 4-Hers? I always get 1 or 2, but okay. We got to go to Chicago, the International Livestock Show, and a lot of other attractions in the Windy City. My mother also was an avid reader and a wonderful cook. My dad and I enjoyed bowling, so of course I was on a team as long as the bowling alley existed. My dad was also a good neighbor, doing deeds for those with health issues, and I worked alongside him while my mom fed the crew. My mom worked quietly to help young people succeed through 4-H and other ways. As you can see, Green Pioneer was my seed corn, and IH Red was my farm equipment. I worked with local implement, seed, and fertilizer dealers to keep my farms going. Even when I moved to town in 1955, I went to the farm every day to feed my 20-plus cats. My only elective office was serving as Plum Creek Township trustee for many years, but you probably knew me better for my train collection. I got my first model train of Lionel, of course, when as a Christmas present for my folks when I was 5 or 6 years old. From then on, I was hooked. When I moved to town, I became even more serious collector. Have you seen my setup at the Ag and Sports Museum, the Ben Scooter train station? Thanks to the help of many others, we started putting that together there in 2013. And I love seeing many people, especially kids, who came to watch it in action. That and my parents' quiet generosity to help others in helping others is what got me thinking about what I should do with my money and land when I die. I had no children and not interested in history as Cousin Dean is, so I wanted to didn't want my farm broken up or give my land away broken up and the Ben Scooter name forgotten. After all, Ben Scooter men are all gone from these parts. I decided again, with the help of others, to donate my property, with some exceptions, to the Algona Community School Foundation. There, the Ben Scooter name will always be known, and many students will benefit from that long line of farmers that ended in this community with me. I died on May 27th, 2021. I could go peacefully, knowing I had done what I could to give pleasure and benefit to the citizens and the community I love. Thanks for coming and hearing my story.
Gouda, dear, what are you looking at?
Julius. Julius, I didn't see you there. I'm just looking through an old photo album of our memories. So many memories together of our life. Please come sit with me, won't you?
Yeah, we do have quite a collection of memories. You know, given our different beginnings in life, it's a wonder that we even ended up together. My parents were married in Bavaria, and they found a sponsor in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, that allowed them then to move to America shortly after they were wed. They soon settled in Whitewater, Wisconsin, where I was born in 1862. Father opened a German-English academy there, which he ran for several years. We moved on to Lansing, Iowa in 1866, where he did general merchandising with the Mueller brothers.
You know, how could I forget Lansing, Iowa, my hometown? I hadn't thought about it for a while. Nestled on the banks of the Mississippi River, look at how beautiful the cliffs are, in Alameda County, it was known as the Switzerland of Iowa. And I attended the Old Stone School there, and after completing high school, believe it or not, I went on to study at Mrs. Wood's Seminary in Chicago. I was named after my mother, Augusta Nylander. But when I married you, Julius, I continued to use my nickname, Guta, because as you well know, your aunt in Whittemore was also named Augusta Chrysilis. And heaven knows the confusion that would have happened with the Postal Service if we had kept the same name.
And I agree that Lansing is very beautiful, but my family didn't stay there very long. My father rode the first train into Algona in 1870, and it wasn't long after that they decided to move here. The community was young, and there was so much opportunity for enterprising businessmen who wanted to work hard. Father opened a general mercantile in a store along Thorington Street, and we lived in the rooms upstairs. The next year, our family settled into a house where the water plant now stands. A few years later, the store moved to a State Street location. Father was a very successful businessman, an investor, and became quite wealthy.
You have some very, very good memories of growing up in Algona, don't you? You even attended Algona College.
I did attend Algona College for 1 year before transferring to the State University of Iowa, where I graduated in 1884. We were married 4 years later and moved to Minneapolis, where I went into the real estate and the loan business with Willett Dorland, who is my sister Emma's husband. Well, that turned out to be a big failure, and within 5 years, we were penniless. The only good thing that came out of our time in Minneapolis was the birth of our son, Theodore Henry.
You know, I loved Emma, but that was such a difficult time. Heartbreaking. Perhaps, though, it was a blessing in disguise. Because your dad, your father, was ready to retire, and all of his children lived so very far away. He didn't have anyone to share his business partnership with. He had partnered with Max Herbst a few years before, but he really, really, really wanted that Chris Schillis name to remain on the store. And I know he was overjoyed when we agreed to move back to Algona. Remember the look on his face when we told him? Priceless.
Yeah, Father was generous indeed. You know, he purchased the house on the corner of Thorington and North Street back in 1893, but that was for us to move into. It was built by A.F. Call in 1884, and it was one of the grandest homes on Thorington Street. As a part of that purchase, he also received 2 lots to the north, where he built his lovely retirement home in 1895. And that was the first home in Algona to be designed by an architect. We always called it the Green Shingle House. You know, and looking back, I think he and Mother had an ulterior motive. For living right next door, I think my parents could see little Theodore most any time they wanted and spoil him.
Remember the cookies? The smell of fresh baked cookies. I loved those too. I know you had some misgivings about coming back to Algona, especially after your business failure. But the community was so welcoming to you, and you just thrived working at the store. In fact, just 4 short years later, you were elected as mayor of Algona.
Well, I have to admit that being elected as mayor was a real confidence booster. You know, I served at a time when many major improvements were being considered. I'm proud to say that during my term, the electric light plant was established, a new sewer system was installed in the city, great improvements were made in the water system, and the Algona Public Library was established. And I wasn't just a mayor in name only. I made sure that all these improvements were kept on track. You know, I even helped find the engine for the light plant, and personally, I traveled to look it over.
The whole community found out what a taskmaster you could be. You kept everything on track, and I'm very proud of that, and proud that it all worked out very well. And it kind of sounds, Julius, like you are ready to get back on that campaign trail. Hmm?
No, Guda. You know that after one term, I retired from the office of mayor because it took too much time away from my responsibilities at the store. But I have to say, it was a pretty exciting time in Algona. Do you remember when William Jennings Bryan came for the Chautauqua and he stayed at our house?
Be still my heart. Do I remember? Look at how handsome that guy is. Oh my goodness. I did quite a bit of entertaining as First Lady back then. But I was the most nervous when Mr. Bryan came to stay at our home. Hostess heat. Just the year before, Mr. Bryan had run for President of the United States. Just think of it. By the time he got to Algona that day, he had been clear across the Midwest, spoken at 2 different towns, had crowds greeting him at every train station. He was hoarse by the time he actually gave his speech in Algona. And when he crossed our threshold that night, all he could do was look for that comfortable bed to fall right into. He was hoarse. He couldn't even sit up to talk with us. But he was so gracious. A little sleep does everyone wonders, doesn't it? And the next morning, he was quite the entertainer because we served him breakfast at the Thorington House Hotel. And he was wonderful to everyone before he got on the train to bid farewell and head off into the distance. Man, I will add, when he was nominated as the Democratic candidate in 1900 and 1908, 2 different times in addition, it was so much fun and so enjoyable to note that he had stayed at our home. And people commented about that quite often. Oh,
You know, and looking at this photo album, I mean, look at the pictures of our trip to Europe. What a grand adventure that was. Budapest, Paris, London. Remember the gondola ride in Venice at night under that full moon? The food and the sights, they were magnificent.
so romantic. I can hear the O Sol Mio right now. When the local newspaper editor asked you to send him reports all throughout our trip, send them back so that he could publish them in the paper, I seriously had my doubts that anyone, not one person in this community, would find them interesting at all. But you did write them so well, Julius, and he did publish them, and they became quite popular. In fact, when we got back, those articles were easy to combine into a book, and according to our friends and family, it's a cherished keepsake.
You know, and it was easy to say yes to that same request when we ventured to the Mediterranean and the Holy Land 3 years later. I was honored when I was asked to gather those articles into a book as well. And I understand that copies of both of those books are still available in our public library. And who would have thought that anyone would be interested in our traveling that occurred over 100 years ago?
I still can't believe it. But something tells me that the circulation desk at the library better be ready for a stampede now that everyone knows that those books are still available. What do you think? I do have to say that those trips were among my fondest memories.
You know, Max Herbst and I, we made such a good team at the store. He was a master retailer, and I handled all the bookkeeping and the financial records. I was just devastated, though, when he died so suddenly in 1915. But thank heavens that Herman Hallberg had been training under Max, and he stepped right into the void and remained in our employ for 47 years. You know, our Theodore started at the store after his college graduation in 1912, and he became the third generation of our family at the store, and he eventually purchased Max's share of the business. So the name once again became the Chrysilla Store. We kept moving through world wars, the Great Depression, local weather disasters, but through the good times and the bad, the Chrysilla Store remained an anchor business in downtown Algona.
Such a landmark for the community. And after your parents moved to California, Theodore moved into the green shingle house next door. Ho-ho. And then we got to become the doting grandparents for his 4 children, Ruth Ann, Ted, Jack, and Julian. Look at how cute they are in their little outfits. I just loved having those children so close by. Oh, it was so much fun every day. But both of our hearts were just broken in two when little Ruth Ann died at the tender age of 9. I really can hardly think and speak about it to this day. It was such a time of sorrow.
Well, I was so glad that you could be there for the boys after Ruth Ann passed. Irene, their mother, was so grief-stricken that she was unable to provide the care and the attention that they needed in their time of sadness too. And she never was quite the same after that tragedy.
Dear Irene, what a burden for her heart. No mother should need to endure that. I just couldn't be prouder of those boys, though. How handsome they are in their uniforms. They grew up to be outstanding young men, and after serving in the Navy during World War II, Ted and Jack succeeded their father in the business, the store. And little Julie, too, served our country, and when he came back, he joined Dwayne Duell at the local newspaper. And eventually he became the editor and purchased the Kossuth County Advance.
Yeah, the photos in this album, they bring back so many memories, and how lucky we were to have found each other and been a part of this wonderful family.
I could not agree more, Julius. It just warms my heart. And we were blessed. to celebrate 50 years together in September of 1938. How could we possibly have known that just a few short months later, in December of that same year, you would pass away? The memories are what sustained me during that time, and thank heavens I got to stay in our beautiful home, near our family, so that I could continue to enjoy them until my final illness and passing in 1945.
The Crushilla store finally closed in 1990 when the fourth generation of the Crushillas family retired. At the time, it was the oldest family-owned and operated business in the state of Iowa, with a direct descendant of the founder still employed and working there. Such a tribute to my father, our whole family, and the community of Algona as well.
Yes, and what fun. Who doesn't remember that fun little tube that took the invoices upstairs? From above, I could look down and see it working.
That's right.
Yes, what a tribute, and thank you to the community of Algona for being so kind to our family. I have to say, this has just been such a treat, Julius. Thank you so much for sharing these memories with me today.
Welcome. I'm Gordon Ogg, and this is my wife Clara Runke Ogg. You will find us here by these three graves with our children, and not at our own gravesite in Riverview, because that's part of our tale today. Our gravesite is over there by the flags, across the road there. You can just see it. My story starts in Dreyfus, Kentucky, where I was born in 1894 as Gorda Harris Ogg. I attended schools in Kentucky and then in Tennessee, when my father opened a general store in 1904. It was not long after that he died, and my mother and my family moved back to our Kentucky home. My mother, being a widow with 6 children, soon married again, this time to Smith Foote, an engineer, and he moved our family to Burt, Iowa, as he had been engaged in dredging the Union Slough. When we first arrived in Burt, I worked at the Father's Grain Exchange, an elevator. Then in June of 1917, I enlisted to fight in World War I, the war to end all wars. There I became a sergeant in a small army unit. At the end of the war, in 1917, I joined my family back in Burt and went into the restaurant business with Bill Hawkart. He was also a veteran of the Great War. Running the restaurant is how I met Clara.
Gordon has traveled far and wide, and my family has too, although I was born in Lotts Creek Township. My parents, Ferdinand and Emily Siegebarth Runke, and their family at that time immigrated from Zimdars, Pomerania, near the Baltic Sea in northern Germany, to the United States through the Castle or Clinton Garden Immigration Center in New York on May 2nd, 1892. I don't know how long it took them to get to the Lotts Creek area or how they got there, but I suspect they arrived by train in Algona and then traveled northwest by wagon to live in an area populated by largely by German immigrants. Their oldest child, Martha, had died in Germany, but their children at the time of immigration were 15-year-old Emil, Herman, who was 11, Johann or John, 7, Otto, 5, Emma was 2, and Eric, 7 months. Very young children often died on immigrant ships, and our baby brother, Eric, was one of them. Another family lost a child who was around 2, and her mother became very attached to our Emma. She even gave Emma her daughter's clothes, according to the story told by my mother. The rest of our family, Marie, Magdalena, and I, were born in the United States. I was born on August 10th, 1898. You can imagine the toll giving birth to and raising this large family took on my mother. When I was 6 years old, she died, and my father soon married Louise Hintz. It was a hard thing to combine 2 families, especially with ours being so large. And some of us got out on our own as quickly as we could. I received my education at the Lotts Creek Parochial School and I imagine some of you did too, or your parents did. Raise your hand if that is true. Nobody from this. I found work in Burt at the general store, and you can see where this is going. When I had a little extra spending money, I would buy a treat at the restaurant. And there I met Gordon, as he was usually known by then. It was a rather long courtship, as we both had to save money to start our own family. We were married in Garner on April 2nd, 1924.
Not only did I have to save money for our new house, but Bill Hawkart and I moved to Algona to open up a grocery store. Quite an investment. Bill had gone to Algona High School, so that was well known, and he was well known in the city. There were several grocery stores in Algona at that time, but ours was successful.
In Algona, we attended the Methodist Church, which was not too easy for my Lutheran father. We also hoped to start our own family. It was a little while before I was in the family way, and we were so happy. Then I lost our baby boy fairly early in my pregnancy, on February 2nd, 1929. It was a sad time for Gordon and me, and there weren't many people in town with whom we could share our sorrow. Being pregnant was a very hush-hush thing in those days, but we did want our boy buried in the baby row at Riverview Cemetery. This is where he's buried, right here. The thing that gave me hope was that some of my best friends told me that they had also lost their first baby and then had several more children. In the meantime, I tried to occupy myself with projects around our house at 612 South Moore. And William's new wife, Marie, whom he had married in November of 1927, taught me how to play bridge, and I was often a guest at her bridge parties.
Clara also helped me at our new business, Hawkart and Ogg Variety Store, which Bill and I established in 1928. We sold our grocery store to a chain called Silverbird Brothers, and then purchased the Galbraith Variety Store. Hawkart and Ogg was located at 120 East State Street, where I think pseudo tax and accounting is now. Clara's experience at the general store in Burt was very helpful, but we were soon eager to try for another child. When she was sure she was in the family way, I insisted she take it easy.
Once again, I lost our baby, a boy, born very prematurely on February 8, 1930. This time, we were devastated. He is buried here, near his brother. When I thought of my mother and all the children she had, it made it hard to understand why I couldn't carry a baby to term. The doctor thought it could be due to being pregnant so soon after my first baby. He suggested we wait a while before attempting another child.
Clara did love the clothing end of our business, and that helped to ease our minds after the loss. I think our favorite times was when our candy sales were on, and all the kids would come flocking in.
I enjoyed waiting on them so much and hearing all their bright chatter as they gathered around to buy orange slices for 10 cents a pound. I often thought that our oldest boy could be among them now. It was also fun to help the children choose their dinner pails and other supplies before school started in the fall.
And I started my hobby of tying flies.
You made some beauties.
Yes, I did, and we began to travel a bit. Remember that summer in 1933 when we went to Webb Lake in northwestern Wisconsin with the McMurrays on a 10-day fishing trip? I caught a lot of fish with my flies at a nearby stream.
I made some delicious fish suppers during that stay, and Mrs. McMurray and I put together some challenging puzzles when the weather didn't cooperate. It was a good break for all of us, but I know that Mrs. McMurphy missed her daughter, Patty Jean, while we were gone.
Our lives were busy, but we still longed for our own child. In the fall of '34, Clara became pregnant once more. But she miscarried again in December of that year, another little boy. This time we vowed that our dream of being parents are over.
It wasn't quite, though, Gordon. Several young people worked at our store, among them Fern Gish, who later married Bill Spack. She was such a warm-hearted person and loved to play the piano. We were so pleased when she and Bill had their first child in June of 1943. Then my brother Otto asked if we would mind boarding his youngest son, Ed, at our house during the week when he came from their Lots Creek farm to Algona to attend high school. didn't take us long to decide that this would be a wonderful opportunity for us and for Ed. He had a fine singing voice, and we enjoyed having him around the house.
And you made him some fine meals too, Clara.
I love to cook and collect recipes.
Bill Hawkart and I sold our variety store in January of 1949 to the R.M. Harrison Company. I became a distributor for Wynn's friction-proof oil, but I really enjoyed the variety store business, and so did Clara. When we had the opportunity, we moved to Hartley in 1953, the year Ed graduated from high school, to operate a variety store there until 1959, when we retired. And we enjoyed our retirement until I died in January of 1978 after a short illness.
Gordon was buried here at Riverview, but I continued to live in Hartley and winter in Clearwater, Florida, until I became a resident of Good Samaritan here in Algona in September of 1991. There I had several good months with my sisters, Emma Beard and Mary Keith, until my death on February 12, 1992. These are the stories of our lives, some so sad, some very happy. We thank you for coming to listen to them.